There's somebody there already. Okay, we're live. I hope. I wish. Okay, hi guys. We're here to talk about plotting and structure and theme with Suzannah Rowntree, who's your favorite historical fantasy author.
Or I ought to be, if I'm
Yes. Yes, if you haven't checked her out, go check her out. She writes a lot of very stabby as well as backstabby magic and very historically correct books. And I got her here today because she is a very plot and structure and thematic oriented writer, whereas I'm just sort of a throw everything at the page and see what emerges and then go with it kind of writer. In other words, she's a plotter, I'm a pantser. And I know there's a lot of you guys that are either sort of in between or more toward the plotting side. So I thought that it might be handy to have a little question and answer session. Funnily enough, for something that I'm doing, is going to be a little bit structured. What I have planned, and we'll see if this actually happens because my plans quite often do not work out as intended. We're planning on going through the different elements that are in the title of the video. As we go, please feel free to ask questions, especially related to what we're talking about at the time, because that means I can see your questions and then I can ask Suzannah, and then you can actually get her questions as we're going with regards to what we're talking about. If you've got anything that is not directly related to plotting, structure, theme, or anything we're talking about at the moment, put it in the chat anyway, and I will ask Suzannah, or we will talk about it later, because we also have some questions about self-publishing that I would like to get to right at the end, but we will save those for the end. So that's basically the way it's going to work. Feel free to say hi in the chat so that we know you're there. I can see there's about 6 people there at the moment and a couple people liking the video. I can see, okay, I can't say your name because I'm quite sure that's like just XIM. Yeah, I can't say that, but hello, I see you. We're going to start really soon, but first I want to point out that because of the difference between how Suzannah and I do our writing, we've got some vaguely different ideas as well by what we mean about plotting and structure. For Suzannah, it's very much, they are very much the same, or so much inextricably linked.
They're pretty closely linked. So I was looking over Wendy's questions earlier, and I was like, why have you got plotting and structure under like two different headings? Like for me, plotting is a process of creating the structure.
Yeah, whereas for me, the plotting is the story element of it, and you do it within the structure of a structure. So the structure is like the skeleton, and the plotting is like the muscles to make everything move in the way it should move and go in the direction it should go, but it has to cling to the structure. So bear in mind that when you're listening to what we're saying, that we both, as different kinds of writers, have a little bit of a different idea of what plotting and structure means to us. But in this case, we're trying to discuss a lot about how an actual plotter works. And if that's you, or if you're trying to get your first book started, or if you're just trying to get some tips for how things work for a plotter, then listen up, and hopefully this will be very helpful for you. Hello to Rebecca in the chat there as well. And again, guys, pop your questions in the chat. We will get to them as we go. The chat is a little bit slow, I've noticed. Usually it takes 30 seconds to 2 minutes for a question to come through. So if we get to it a little bit after you expect it, it's just because of that. So what I've done is I've given us a few questions for each heading, and we'll take miscellaneous at the end, and we're going to start with plotting. And Suzannah and I had some discussion about this a little while ago, where Suzannah was showing me some tips and some tricks for getting started plotting for people who either have never plotted before, or who, like myself, are pantsers but would like to do a little bit of plotting effectively. How do you recommend getting started to people like that, to someone who has never plotted before but wants to, who doesn't do it, doesn't know where to start? What's your first port of call?
I think probably the most important thing to start with is just start with the story itself. And like if you haven't done a lot of writing before, you may not know whether you're a plotter or a pantser, and it may take you a little while to figure out which one you are. Like I started very much as a pantser myself, But as time went on, I began to find that I worked better when I had a better idea of where I was going. So I started to write down, like, okay, the next chapter, I want this to happen.
I did the opposite of that. I came from doing all that, and then I stopped because I never wrote the story. So you recommend starting story, finding what your story is.
Start with, if you've never done this before, and you don't know which one you are,
Just see what works.
Start with whatever feels the most natural, and
Yeah.
you'll figure it out eventually as you figure out your process, which is a huge part of becoming an author, is finding
Yes.
out what your process is and how your brain works to write your story. So if you've been doing this and you're interested in trying a bit more plotting, or maybe you've got a pretty good idea that you are a plotter and you want to know how to do it, I would recommend, just write down whatever it is that you feel that you need in order to answer what you need, if that makes sense. Like I was just like writing down a description of what needed to happen in the next scene or the next chapter. When I realized that this was working really well for me and that this was how my process was going to work into the future, then I started looking at books that explain how plot works.
Right. So that actually goes really well into my next question, because it sounds like you have a really good idea of what your story is already before you sit down and start writing. So being able to actually sit down and write what happens in each chapter, I can't do that, because quite often I'll just have either a beginning point and an end point, or only an end point, or only like a big thing that I want to happen, and then everything else just sort of sprawls out from there backwards and forwards. So for you, how long do you spend like plotting, setting stuff down, doing all this stuff? I know with the Ultramare books, it's like, what is it, weeks to months? But for a regular one, like say for your Miss Sharp's mysteries or the Miss Dark, those books, how long would you typically sit down and actually plot those?
That's a really good question. One thing I will say though, going back to what you were saying before, like you mentioned that you're at the point, you start writing when you're at the point where you've got a few ideas for the book, but you don't know exactly how it's all going to fit together. That's the point at which I start plotting.
Right.
And so for me, I find it helpful to think of it in terms of, when is it best for my brain to stop and think about what's going on? Because I
already know that answer. It's in the shower, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I do a lot of it in the shower and also walking, but it's during my plotting my plotting time that I come up with the ideas of how everything is going to stitch together, and I make sure that I have everything in there that needs to go in to set up the big things. What I find is that when I'm actually drafting the book, my brain has a really laser focus, really laser targeted focus.
I wish the ADH writer
does not. So because I'm so focused on writing, it is really difficult for me to switch modes to, how can I, what needs to happen in this scene to bring the bits of the story, all the disparate elements together. I can't
to actually make it cohesive into a story instead of a collection of ideas.
Exactly.
Right.
So I can't.
So you have to do that
first. It's difficult for me.
Yeah.
So the best time for me to do that is to have a dedicated time where I just do that. For Wendy, she's able to do it as she goes.
It just does it in my head. And then it stays in my head, which is why I forget to eat and forget what day it is, which I feel is not actually a very good way to live your life. So plotting has a lot of really good things to it. So you have each day that time, and then that you wouldn't do writing on those days as well. You just do that.
Because that's another thing that I found out. When I got to know Wendy, she was always, I'm going to write on this project for a bit, and then I'm going to write on that project for a bit. And I thought, wouldn't that be fun to be able to? Well, I can't do that. It's that focus.
Yeah, the code switching.
I can't switch tracks. Once I'm on one track for the day, I just run down that track for the rest of the day. So What was the question again? Because I haven't
It
got
was
a-
how long do you usually spend just with your plotting stuff?
So for the gas lamp romps, it'll depend on how much, because there's sort of planning on the series level and also
Yep.
planning on the book level.
Of course, yeah.
So
do you do those separately, or do you do your series arc first and then look at your per book, or?
I will do a bit of series arc stuff first,
Right.
and that way I'll know sort of what's happening in each book, so where the opportunities are to do the interesting things.
That we'll be able to. Yes, I'm going to ask you some questions about that later, actually. Yes.
Okay, so for my current gas lamp series, which is Miss Dark's Apparitions.
It is such fun. I read the first book. I only read an early draft and it was already fun.
It's better now. But so I would have spent, I think, at least a month just on the high level series plotting.
Yep.
And then 2 to 4 weeks on the outline. But the outline is almost like, for me, it's almost like a draft in itself. It's
because you're not just doing chapter by chapter, you're often doing scene by scene.
Yeah.
I can't even comprehend that. I literally can't comprehend being able to write down even a couple of sentences on scene to scene, because I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I know like the emotional beats and where somebody's going to get stabbed, and that's it. That's all I know. Wow, that's really okay. I know that it's a different style of writing, but it still always amazes me that she can do that, as well as the sheer amount of historical fact and research that goes into it. Because I research stuff, but not like that.
Well, that's what makes the Ultramare books so much. Like I've been here in Tasmania for 8 weeks so far. 9th coming up before I go home.
That's right. Yeah.
And the whole time I have spent just on preparing to write the next Ultramare book. I had to read the book that comes immediately before it chronologically.
Yes.
I had to reread the drafts of the next 2 books in the series.
So that you're building toward.
I had to cram a lot of history, and I'm still doing that.
Yes, I've seen. I was with her in the library the other day. She went to one of the university libraries and took out some books. One of it was the Women in the Crusades.
Gender in the Crusades.
Gender in the Crusades, and she was looking through articles on there. There were some really interesting ones, but I won't get into that, otherwise we'll get sidelined. So when you've done that and you've got everything sorted out, you've done your per day thing, you've finished your plotting, how do you implement that plotting as you write? Because you've said you find it difficult to code switch to the writing and the drawing together of those elements. So once you're actually in that headspace, do you just sit down with your plotting, all the stuff you've written beside you? Do you ever deviate from it? How closely do you align with yours? Because I do not align closely. When I have plotted, and I have plotted, not very often, I tend to find myself going off the tracks very often. But it's always in the best way, because my brain likes to use structure in the way it wants to use structure, not in the way it's supposed to use it. So it will just go off the rails, and I will end up with a different beast to what I started with in all the best possible ways. But I feel like you've already got such a good grasp of what you already wanted that wouldn't happen to you. But I am curious, how do you implement that? How does it change or not?
Okay, so I'll have my plotting document up on the screen, and I'll have my writing document up on the screen.
But not on your phone.
Oh, no, yeah, no, I've been working for 8 weeks on this.
She brings a little keyboard, tap, 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 tap. And she has good eyes. She's not old like me.
I did come and print out a bunch of stuff.
Yes.
So that I could
pin it on the walls like a little conspiracy theory.
Not quite. I've got it all stapled together in little booklets.
That helps.
So I'll have it on the screen next to the actual draft.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you got to realize my focus really is just on getting the words
down
written
on the page
when I'm in that drafting headspace, and it is not the time to stop and rethink what I've done.
So your brain doesn't just do the thing of like, oh, this would actually fit better together like this. And
sometimes it does. But it's only if I'm writing and it's not feeling natural. And like I do, the main way that I find that I deviate is not everything in in the plotting gets onto the page.
Right, yes, that makes sense.
I find myself cutting out bits because
They don't
they're
serve
not
the story.
necessary,
Yep.
or they don't fit the scene organically. I have lots of stuff that it ends up just not getting in because there isn't a place for it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And that's because I like to be fairly thorough in my plotting, because by the time I'm actually sitting down to write it, I have faith in it that it's the best I can do
already
at this point. But then what happens is, after I finish the draft, I get my brain out of drafting mode. I let it sit for as long as, a few months usually.
Yep.
Then I come back and I'll reread it, and then I'll be like,
no.
What was I thinking? This needs major surgery, and I'll pull it apart.
By the way, it doesn't usually need major surgery, not the ones I've read. It usually needs a little, you know how you've got those jumpers and skirts where if you pull one thread, everything gets, well, actually a little bit like this. It's basically like that. All it needs is a little tug in the right place, usually, I find, to draw out the stuff that's already there. That's in my experience with her books.
Well, you've never read one of my Ultramare books.
This is true. I'm partway through, but I have to be in the mood for historical stuff, really in the mood for it.
But for them, quite often, huge slabs of the book just won't work. And well, the thing is, they're longer, and I find that the complexity and the difficulty increases exponentially with word count.
And also with each new book in the series, and with it being a series going toward the end, I find
there's some of that going on for sure.
Yeah, I get really overwhelmed at that, actually. So yeah,
thankfully Ultramare is not truly a 9-book series. It's more like three interconnected trilogies. So
that's what I thought.
That keeps things
helps a little bit
manageable.
Okay, so we're going to move on to structure, just structure by itself, in terms of the actual framework in this case. Now, Suzannah and I have already, again, discussed this a little while ago, but we didn't get into it terribly deeply. So I was wanting to know, what are the different types of structure, and can you give just a brief outline of each one so that everyone can be like, oh, this is what that structure is, and I can use it, or just the most common ones?
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to answer.
I like to ask the hard questions.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not sufficiently conversant with alternative structures to answer that completely. I think that in a lot of non-Western storytelling, particularly, there are alternative structures.
Well, what are the most commonly seen Western ones that you see around?
Okay, so in sort of the English-speaking world, there'll be a lot of discussion of 3-act structure, 5-act structure, sometimes 4-act structure. My personal opinion on that is that they're actually all different ways of describing the same basic structure.
Yeah.
So all of them have sort of divide the story up into 4 equal parts.
Yep.
The first part, the first act, and then you've got a major turning point, and then there's the second part, which is either the second act or the first half of the second act, or depending on whether so there's the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the fourth quarter.
Yep.
And there's 3 major turning points, one at about 25% of the way through, one in the middle, and one at about 75% of the way through. And so whether you're talking about, no matter how many acts you're talking about, it's basically different ways of divvying up that basic structure.
Yep. So that you can manage to get in all the plot points and all the feelings and all the, or so that you can get the pacing the way that you want to get it.
Yeah, it's about pacing. It's about when it feels natural for something big and game changing to happen. Yep. For example, as I was telling you about before, one of the most important turning points in the plot is the first one, which is the one that defines the conflict that the entire story is going to be about, and that it's really important. One of the most common mistakes I see from beginning writers is that that point of the story, when you understand what the main conflict of the story is about, that point often comes far too late.
Right, yes.
And so
that
you're
left
reading this
idling.
thing and you're like, when are they going to get to the point? What is this story actually about? Like, I'm hearing about these characters, but I'm not understanding what they're trying to achieve in this story.
Yes. Yep. So it's important in order to keep things moving and to have someone feel like they're actually getting an engaging and timely sort of a story.
Yeah, exactly. The reader needs to know that they're in the hands of somebody who's telling them a good story, and there are certain things that have to occur for that.
Yeah,
for the readers to have trust in you.
I think that's where it gets different in different countries or different cultural types of story. Because I know even just from Korean storytelling and the little bit of Chinese that I've seen, the structures and the mores are very different. So if you're coming from a different culture and trying to find a coherent story in the 3-act structure or the 4-act structure, I think it would feel a little bit confined and odd. Whereas quite often I'll try and read something that's Korean and the way it's set out is just completely different. So yes,
I suspect, and don't quote me on this, but I suspect that a lot of alternate structures are probably playing with, like, it's not going to be totally different to what
not completely
I'm used to,
yeah.
but it's going to be playing with that. So, for example, maybe I have a rough outline for a future book, which instead of having one central midpoint, has two.
Right.
I don't know if I'll end up running with that because it may condense to the point where it's actually.
It could be fun to do though.
But some things like that, you can tweak the structure according to what your story needs, because the point is, what does the story need and how does the story develop most naturally? And I definitely subordinate the structure to the story.
Yeah, I do that myself, but usually not on a conscious level. With me, it's usually more of a, this is what's happening, and then afterward I'm like, oh right, so that isn't technically what you would normally do with that, or oh, this is just a version or a different type of that. So yeah.
And another way that you can play with structure, of course, is that there's the serial storytelling where instead of one big overarching plot,
that's the one I have fun
you have
with.
like 7 small ones linked up in a row, and like
that's what I like to play with. That's a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I'm used to a bit more as well. Okay, so which of the plot structures that you're familiar with do you prefer to use, or that you most find yourself using, and why do you think that is?
A lot of the time I default to 4-act because again, it's the same 4 quarters with 3 major turning points and a beginning and an end, right?
Yep.
So I tend to find it easiest to think in terms of 4 chunks of the story.
Yeah.
The one I'm working on now has 5 chunks because like there's the middle turning point of the story, what we would call the midpoint, is actually a giant battle.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
Unfolds over the course of 3 days.
Yep.
So so that becomes its own central act.
Right.
Which will take up hopefully under 20% of the book.
But still, it's a major turning point and it involves a lot of moving parts, so it needs to be sufficiently impactful.
Yeah, and I mean, in a way, because this is the middle book of a 9-book series, occurring at the midpoint of a 200-year history time span, it's got to be fairly epic and feel very momentous.
So it's a midpoint in a lot of different ways. Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But normally, you find yourself just sort of going toward the 4-part one that's like sort of 3-act, but 3-point structure rather than 3-act. It's got 4 pieces, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. So what is your best advice? And this, again, is something we talked about that I thought would be interesting to bring out. What would be your best advice for using story structure to to bring out your theme most effectively? Because I know we talked about making scenes impactful by like making turning points and those plot points memorable by using a big scene to bring them about. How does that tie in with theme? How do you try to do that?
Oh, okay. So, well, maybe I better start by explaining how to emphasize the big turning points.
Yes.
Right. So, well, I guess what I was just saying about the battle was a good example of this. Like, because it's got to feel like such a huge thing, I'm going to spend the time and expand that what would normally be a one scene into an entire chunk of the story.
Yep.
So that it feels as big as I want it to feel.
It needs to have that weight and that impact.
Has that weight and that impact. Because this is a point in the history after which nothing was ever the same again for a lot of people.
Yep.
And so taking the time to really build an epic and memorable scene is a great way of getting people to realize what your structure is.
Yeah. Because you've really highlighted and emphasized it by this huge battle or this hugely impactful moment.
Right. So let's take an example that everybody should know. Pride and Prejudice, right? The midpoint of Pride and Prejudice is...
Or should be.
It wasn't in the black
40s
and white
one,
movie
the black
we
and white.
Watched last week. But
Laurence Olivier, though, it has Laurence Olivier, so
it was very interesting. But the midpoint of the book is the first proposal scene, and thematically, the work that does is that it gives Elizabeth and Darcy both a big reality check.
I was going to say a big kick up the pants, but yes.
But it's literally what people call the moment of truth.
Yeah.
Like, thematically speaking, it's the point at which the truth that your character may have been ignoring the whole time comes and whacks them up the head in a way that they cannot ignore. And for Lizzie, it's I guess it's more the fallout from the proposal scene where she gets the letter and explains why Darcy has been acting the way he has and what's really up with Wickham, and she realizes that she's being wrong about a lot of things, and so that it impacts her character development and it impacts the theme. But
I think it also impacts her realizing she doesn't know all that's going on in his facade, because she has literally no idea that he's been in love with her. And part of the reason that she's so prejudiced is because his appearance is so much against him, and that he looks so, I mean, he is kind of a prat at the start as well.
Oh, absolutely.
He is proud, but also she realizes that she can't tell from just appearance, as she's been telling, all that she thinks that she knows.
That's the moment of truth that happens during the proposal itself. And so, you could have written this book with Lizzie happening to overhear a conversation where she realizes, oh, he's in love with me. Would that have been as memorable as this bloke actually rolling in and making
your family is disgusting, but I would like to marry you despite all of these things about you that are bad.
Most ill-judged proposal.
Yeah.
And quite often in an action movie, there'll be a big action sequence, like in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, where they turn it into an action movie. They literally fight.
Yes.
So look for ways not just to have the turning point happen, but to make it particularly epic and memorable and dramatic.
Yeah, and that'll help draw out your theme, your story, everything about it that you want to.
Right. So often the thematic change. Right. So the theme is all about how either the character themselves change or how they can change the world around them. And so because it's usually about change, your theme will develop very gradually as your character changes very gradually over the course of the story. Yes. And while the big turning points in the plot will be major sort of epiphanies, revelations to the character, they're not necessarily going to be memorable ones unless you surround them with all that awesome.
Yeah. No, I like that idea. That actually leads right on into our discussion of theme. And I know there aren't a huge amount of you guys there, but don't forget, if you do have questions, please ask them so that we can get into them. I'm not used to doing a question and answer type video. Normally, I'm just talking to you guys and we're doing back and forth. So it's okay if you don't have questions. It's fine to just listen to us talk. But if you have them, put them in the chat and we will get to them very shortly. But for now, we'll go on to theme because surprisingly enough, we seem to be right on where I was figuring we would be at about this point. And leading on from the last question, which was how you're tying your theme in, can we please get into, I would like to know, in your opinion, what is a theme and why is it important?
Okay. There are a few different ways of speaking about themes when you're talking about stories. Quite often when I was reviewing books, I would say, oh, this is a theme or that is a theme. And what I just meant is this is a repeated idea that's important to the story. But
that's what I usually go with, quite honestly, yes.
But as an author and coming at it from a more technical standpoint, I think of theme as the message, the central message that your story is going to convey.
Yep.
Why is it important?
And why is it important?
Okay.
Because I didn't originally, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to add here that I don't come into talking about or writing theme or at least I have never, from a very plotting point of view. I'll be writing and then I'll be like, oh, this is a thing I want to draw out, or I'll have already had that idea that I want to draw out and then have written the story around it. So it always happened, not always. Lately, I've been trying to do it intentionally, but in general and in the past, it has been very unintentional. The way it comes out, it just organically grows, which is okay. But I think if you're trying to actually be the best writer you can be, you need to have some intentionality to that, which is why I wanted to ask Suzannah about this and get her thoughts and views about it, because she does this very intentionally and, in my opinion, very, very well. It's one of the reasons I really, really love City Beyond the Glass, because everything is very weighty and specific and just adds up and adds up and adds up.
The City Beyond the Glass is my fairy tale retelling of the 12 dancing princesses set in Renaissance Venice during a particularly interesting point of history.
And a particularly soul-wrenching one too, quite honestly, in a lot of ways.
I can't help which periods of history I'm drawn to, Wendy.
Oh no. So when you do it, or at least you've already said that for a writer, it's more about the idea that you want to convey by your book, or the driving force of it. Why is it important to you as a writer? Like, why do you choose to write like that? Because you could just write a fun story.
Yeah.
And that's what I started out doing, just writing a fun story.
Well, I'm beginning to be able to write stories that are just fun.
No, I have to disagree there, because Miss Sharp's monsters and also Miss Dark, they are fun, but they are not just fun. There are still the underpinnings. There are still thematic elements to them. And while they're not as punchy, as in they don't just keep punching you in the face, it is definitely there. It's just more delicately layered through.
Okay. Why is it important? There are a couple of different levels on which it is important. For one thing, it's important to me personally because I'm a pretty idealistic and passionate sort of person.
INFP.
I'm the sort of person who goes on crusades.
Yeah. Me too. But I'm from the INFJ point of view, which means I'm more likely to be misled and just very angry.
Yeah, I see something wrong in the world. I want to do something about it. Say something about it. I can't help it. I would run away and join the resistance if there was one. So
I'd probably be the detective trying to catch you.
Yeah, so it's important to me to be able to say things about that I believe in, and quite often when I'm reading a story or watching a movie, I will see that the theme is there, but I will be disappointed by how shallow it is.
Yeah,
And
or
I'll
be
be
in
like,
disagreement with it sometimes.
well, yeah, but even when I agree with the theme, it's like you really that was a low ball. Like that was
I feel like you are very constructive with your themes.
I want it to be an
It's about
interesting theme. I
change.
want it to make people think.
For me, it tends to be more of a railing against stuff or an anguish cry of the soul. Without necessarily any way of changing things. But I find that that's what I like about a lot of your books. It's not just a lot of the themes you have are inherently hopeful, even though they have to go through a lot of dirt and mud first. So I think that speaks to why it's important to you as well, because you have a view of the world that is at the same time that it's very flawed, but you have hope for it.
Absolutely. I have a lot of hope. But I also tend to think about stories in terms of the ideas that they could be involved with. So for instance, I wrote a retelling of Beauty and the Beast where the curse was on the beauty, not the beast. She wasn't seeing the beast as he truly was. And that was just an idea that dropped into my head one day, partly influenced by G.K. Chesterton's quote.
Good old GK.
What was it again? The truth, the Beauty and the Beast is about the truth that a thing cannot be lovable until it is loved.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. I see where you went with that one, because I've also read that one. It's not one of my favorites of your work, but only and specifically because I didn't care for the lead male character. And it is a specific thing to me as to why I didn't, because I dislike some of the things he does. They're not wrong things. They're just things that I specifically dislike. So if I was in that story, I'm sorry, everyone would be dead and things would have gone very badly for everyone.
So that's the first level on which theme is important to me. It's important to me because I'm that sort of person.
Yes.
But the second level on which theme is important to me is that it's important to me for dramatic purposes.
Yes, right.
Right? For me, the stories that touch me most, and this may also have something to do with the sort of person I am, but I also think that it's something that's generally true for most stories, which is that your story should hinge on choices. For me, choices. Different storytellers have different approaches to this. Christopher Nolan says, the only useful definition of storytelling is that it's a controlled release of information, which I can totally
Anyone
see.
who says the only thing of something needs to be punched in the face repeatedly.
He probably ought to be, but there's
but I like him. I like his storytelling.
Yeah, no, also, he does revelation sequences very well.
Yes,
but if I was going to make that sort of sweeping generalization, I would be like, well, the only useful definition of storytelling is that choices. It's about moral choices. Yes. And so your theme is like what moral choice ought to be made and which one
is made,
which one stands triumphant at the end. If you're writing a story with a positive character arc, your character might be struggling to make the correct choices, but eventually takes a leap of faith and makes the right choice and, is given justice or mercy because of it in a triumphant and hopeful way. In what we call a flat arc, which is where the main character doesn't have to change, but they have to change the world around them.
Yes.
It's all about getting the people around them to make the right moral choices. Right. And will they or won't they? And what good things happen because of that. And then there's the negative character arc, which is
going from bad decision to bad decision.
Yeah, there are, you can divide these up a few different ways. For example, one hears that there's something called disillusionment arc, which is where somebody starts out believing the wrong thing and they come to the realization of the truth, but it's a really depressing truth. It tends to be my least favorite.
Yeah, if you're going to be disillusioned about something, at least be disillusioned about something that's actually a lie and then go on to something better instead of just sinking into a existential sort of dread.
But then there are the stories, the tragedies, where a character makes the wrong moral choice and suffers for it.
Yes.
And so that, you know, in all these different sorts of story, the question is this person or are these people going to make the right moral choices
or the wrong one? It gives a sort of gripping power to
Yeah.
the story. It adds to the power it has to move the person who's reading it or watching it.
Yeah,
Actually, Rebecca's saying, so by that it's cause to effect. Choice 1 leads to choice 2 to choice 3. And yeah.
Emphatically, yes. Yeah. Yes. It's a cause-effect chain. And this has something to do with my own personal faith as an author. As a Christian, I believe that, you know, we get what we don't deserve in terms of mercy, but we also can, you know, expect to get, you know, do not be deceived.
God's not mocked. Yeah,
whatever
you sow,
you're
gonna reap.
that you will reap. And so for me, poetic justice in storytelling is about those moral choices and
giving it that weight.
The author, and so that gives the story a lot of weight. Like, it feels good when Lizzie learns to look beyond her prejudice.
Yes.
And see who Mr. Darcy is underneath. It feels even better when she unloads everything that's wrong on Mr. Darcy, and he's like, "You are the most correct woman who ever lived."
Yes.
Well, I took your notes. Do you have any more?
Well, that's the good thing. That's the good thing about that story. That's why it's so satisfying. But I think that what you were saying about it being important, that's a lot of the reason to me why theme is also important. Because I am someone who, when I want to watch something fun and bubbly that will just make me happy, I watch action movies. I like watching people being beaten up in fun and creative ways. For me, that is very cathartic. However, action movies are basically fluff in general. If run-of-the-mill action movies are just basically fluff. They are fantasy for men, and that is all they are. And I enjoy the beating up parts, but every now and then you get one that goes so far beyond its genre and its original purpose that it has an actual theme and a story. And I went to watch Vin Diesel's Bloodshot, I think it's called. I went into that being like, I am really depressed. I just want to sit here and watch people being beaten up by Vin Diesel. I did not, I mean, I got to see that, but it was so rich with the story and the theme, and it went in places I just never expected it to go. So I've watched a lot of action movies over the years. Most of them are largely forgettable unless they're remembered by particularly good martial arts or anything like that. But that one has stayed with me. That one, along with Pitch Black, which again is another Vin Diesel, and is elevated above the normal by a thematic intensity that hits you in the face at various points during the movie. Unfortunately, it also has a lot of bad language, so I can't thoroughly recommend it because it does have the F word scattered throughout it so often. But the actual story is so rich and so gripping.
Theme-heavy stories are just...
It's memorable. It sticks in your head. So you have to have it. If you want a story that stays with people. Yeah, if you want a story that stays with people, if you want a story that makes an impact that is going to change anything or anyone, or even that will just strike a chord with anyone, you have to have that theme. You have to incorporate it. You have to learn how to use it. B. Foreman says, I concur. Is that about Pitch Black or Bloodshot or both? or just about theme in general? But if it's about the movies, yes, they're very good movies. Okay, I think we better move on a little bit now. I knew we would take a bit longer in this section because theme is something
so much to say.
Yeah. So when you're developing your theme before you're writing, what is your process for doing that, and what sort of preparation do you do? Like, how much is mental, how much is on the page? How do you manage to settle that? Is it something you've chosen before and you just fit everything around it, or
Quite often the idea for a story, when it drops into my head initially, is going to involve the theme.
Yep.
So Miss Sharp's Monsters, set in a version of 1890s Europe where all the royal families ruling all the empires are different forms of monster. And, the Kaiser is a werewolf.
Werewolf.
The Tsar is a vampire. Queen Victoria, well, I'm keeping that up my sleeve.
You have to read the book to find out.
But that was like that's thematic, because obviously the empires at this point in the world's history were really preying on and exploiting the people of the world, both domestically and foreign. And so for me, that big metaphor, that big central metaphor
of monsters
and imperial empires, just was the story. Like, without that central conceit, there wouldn't have been a story. And so in that way, the theme was very much inherent in the story idea from the beginning. Same with Ultramare, really, because there was a point when I wasn't expecting it to be historical fantasy. This was very early on when
It's just going to be historical?
Yeah, I barely knew who I was as an author.
Yes. The growing pains of the budding author.
And I knew I wanted it to be about family members.
I love stories about family.
Right. And I was
especially found family.
I was thinking it would be about a family that, what we call a generational saga.
Like Trollope.
Yeah. Well, different generations of the same family, and you follow the different generations throughout the centuries. But then I realized I really wanted these family members to know each other personally, because their actions were going to have
ripple effect.
An impact on each other throughout time. And so then I was like, no, it's going to be the members of a nuclear family who are split apart by time travel.
This is honestly how I end up with time travel in my books as well. It just happens all of a sudden. I never mean it to, and then it happens. Except with the time travelers books, they were literally in the title. So you start out with that, and then you build.
So the themes of the Ultramare books are very much inherent in that in the whole idea of family and time travel. Like, these people are sent forward in time,
rather than backwards.
Back. So they've come into a future where their homeland is occupied by various different layers of people that they never knew, because there have been several different conquests. And they're not happy with any of this. And are they going to try and assert themselves on this time period? Are they going to be like, excuse me, I was here first? Are they going to try and turn back time so that they can have their homeland the way that they want it?
It gives you so many things to play with.
Or are they going to look around and say, hey, I love what's here, and I'm going to try and take care of it? And so those are sort of the different ways that the main characters respond to what's happening.
And the different decisions that can then follow on to other decisions.
Right. So there's a lot of like, what is this sort of central metaphor? What is this central, I guess, fantasy element as well? Because I'm writing, writing historical fantasy. Quite often the theme of the story is determined by the magical or fantasy elements for me.
Right. Well, that actually speaks a little bit to one of the questions here. It's not really thematic, but Rebecca wants to know, speaking of titles, at what point do you come up with the titles? Because yes, I come up with my titles quite early. I find it very useful to the story. So I know where your titles come from. So I think they're quite closely intertwined with the theme. So I assume they would have come up fairly early, yes?
They come up fairly early at the moment. My debut novel, Pendragon's Heir, had a different title for most of its life.
What was it called?
It was called Grail Maiden, because the central character is...
I also really like that title. I feel like that's a really good title.
It is. I felt like Pendragon's Heir was a bit more marketable, though.
Yes, definitely more marketable. There are blokes out there who will not pick up a book if it has Maiden on the front cover.
That's true, but I also wanted to be like, this is about King Arthur, and this is about
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Anyway, but back to the point.
Yes,
which
back
was
to the point.
Okay,
developing.
So I for me, theme is very much the
Inherent.
Like, if I don't have the theme, I don't have the story.
Yep.
which was I've always wanted to write a retelling of Hades and Persephone. I had no idea what the theme was going to be until I figured it out in a bit of flash fic that I wrote for the Pilgrim Artists Festival down here. And
I liked that bit of
once
flash
I
fic.
had the theme, I was like, yes, now I can write the novel.
Yeah.
So once I've got that, then in the plotting stage, very important, I will talk about that. I will look at the main characters of the story, the protagonist, the antagonist, whoever the ally character is, whoever the subplot characters are, and they will have a different answer to the central thematic question.
Right, so they're very closely intertwined.
So everybody has a specific viewpoint. So for instance,
to it.
Right. So
right to the theme.
One movie that has a great theme in it is Captain America: The Winter Soldier.
Yep.
And the central theme has to do with trust. Can you trust other people? And the protagonist believes that you can trust other people, and that you should trust other people. And then you've got, another character giving a long speech about how you can't trust other people. My granddaddy liked people who just didn't trust them. And then you have the Black Widow character has, she doesn't trust anyone, and her character arc in the film is about
she doesn't like anyone either.
No, that's true. She's lovely. I love her.
I also like her.
But she ends the movie by putting out so much information about herself to make it public, because it's about how it becomes all about transparency. The theme is government should be transparent.
Yes.
Right. And so
I was going to say I can pick up the theme just from you talking about
right?
it. Yeah.
So that's a really good example how when it's not just that you as the author have to have a point of view. You need to give your characters different points of view,
and they don't have to be all aligning with yours.
Yeah, no, they must be different.
Yeah.
And then that way, and you'll if you take this seriously enough, the viewpoints you don't quite agree with, you'll be writing them as though you did agree with them. Like you'll be you'll be giving them a really strong voice.
Because you want to be displaying differing ideas of this central theme.
Yeah. So, and then the question becomes whose
truth is going to stand at the end.
Whose truth is going to stand at the end.
Yep. And by which you're sort of saying in your book, this is the truth. Yeah. Quite often.
So I will sit down and I will figure out which character is going to stand for what proposition,
and how things are going to end up with that,
and how that impacts how they behave.
So that actually leads really, really well into the final question of these three topics that we were talking about before we go into some miscellaneous stuff. How do you best develop your theme when you're writing? You've already talked about the way you like to give each of your characters a different viewpoint of the central theme, and that's one of the methods by which you can draw out your theme. What other sort of tricks and tips for like the actual writing process, like the story development as you're writing? What other tips and tricks do you have?
We've got a question from Jane.
So does the protagonist always have the winning idea?
Not necessarily, because if it's a tragedy, they will fail to grasp the truth.
King Lear is one of my favorite examples of that. So many people die, and the one who's left standing at the end is what is it? The young. Is he a general? I can't remember. There's very few people left standing at the end, but they're standing in the wreckage of everyone else's ideas, and most of the main characters are dead. So basically they've left a wreckage from which something beautiful is meant to grow, and that is the winning idea. So it's still standing at the end. It's just not any of the main characters' idea.
Like in Ophelia, which is
watch the movie.
Watch Ophelia. We love it.
Love it so much.
But the protagonist is Ophelia, and she has a flat arc, so she has the truth all along.
Yes, it's so beautifully done.
And Hamlet, whom she's in love with, and is trying to persuade to reject the lies,
justice and truth.
He doesn't manage to. This is not really spoilers because Hamlet is a tragedy.
It's Hamlet.
It's about how it's about how she can't get Hamlet to
To
step
actually-
away from his vengeance.
Yeah, to be able to see life for what it really is, or to see what's important about life. It's one of the things I adore about that movie. I will be watching it again and again, and not just for the gorgeous artistry and music that it has. So definitely they don't always
So
have
in the
winning
original
idea.
play, Hamlet doesn't learn the truth either, and in the
He's just a prat in every version.
but in
basically.
a lot of but
just
but
a
you
very
don't always,
hot-blooded and lovable prat.
you don't always have the protagonist knowing the truth from the start. Quite often it's about how the protagonist is forced to learn the truth.
Oh, Les Mis. What's his face? Not Jean Valjean, the inspector. Javert. Yeah, he's always been a favourite character of mine. I don't know either. I can't speak French. Yeah, like it's. I guess you can say the protagonist has the winning idea there, but there's nobody really wins in Les Mis either. I don't really think. But Javert, I always come back to him when I think of people who should be. Yeah, but he feels like the protagonist. He feels like he should be the protagonist because he's on the side of right and justice. And if you have a protagonist like that, and they're so far entrenched in what they think is justice and right, without considering human cost or humans or love of fellow men, you end up with a character who can do a lot of damage, and then you can't end up having them having the winning idea because their idea is not right. But they can still make a compelling protagonist. In fact, they do make a really compelling protagonist.
Yeah.
So you definitely don't have to have that. Definitely not in my opinion.
Yeah. So the question was how to develop a theme when you're writing. So yes, so I will, once I've given everybody a specific point of view, it's important to let them act according to that point of view, and
consistently doing that,
and give them an opportunity or two to say, this is what my point of view is.
So that you're not just hinting at it, you're trying to outright say, or at least to make it clear that that's what your theme is.
Yeah. And then I like to use theme as a razor. It determines what belongs in your book and what doesn't. So the more stuff that you can relate to the theme, the more tightly knit your book is going to feel, the more cohesive it's going to feel.
That's the bit I don't do on purpose that my brain weaves in as I write. I would love to be able to sit down and do that first.
Once you've got an idea of what your theme is, then it becomes very easy to know what goes in, what stays out. For example, I have a novella which is free to newsletter subscribers, Children of the Desolate, and it's about a woman who's separated from her husband, and she's in a war zone. She's got a few children. She's got to take care of them. She doesn't, and she's all her life she's relied on her husband, and the whole character arc is about whether she's going to be able to survive this on her own without him. And I knew that when I went back to rewrite it after I'd done the draft, I'd outlined it, I'd written the draft, I'd come back to it and I'd read it, and I was like, okay, what I want to do is I want to add in some flashbacks explaining how she and her husband met so that we can see what they're like together. And so then I was like, okay, I don't have a lot of space here. I want to make this a really tropey, instantly understandable romance. Like, it's got to be something that everybody will instinctively recognize as, oh, this is so romantic. So there are a few romance templates like that. Like there's the Romeo and Juliet one where they're falling in love, despite being on opposite sides of some big conflict. And there are a few others. You can fill in the blank. But and so I was really stumped as to which one I should use, because and then I realized,
this one's going to fit with the theme.
It's got to be a rescue romance.
Right, because it's fitting with the theme.
That will explain how she came to depend on him, and we can really get an idea of how helpless she felt without him.
Yes, and then it feeds back again into making it more of a triumph when she can overcome those things, or how she figures out how to live like that, because she's either taking back her helplessness of that moment as well as what's happening at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I like that idea.
Yeah, and then of course You know, you want to structure your character arcs around the character learning or failing to learn or teaching other people a specific truth.
Yep.
And at the end of the book, at the climax, you really want to give the character their biggest moral test yet.
Yep. And really beat people over the head with this.
Yeah. It's
go big or go home.
It's entirely appropriate to have a really blatant enunciation of what your theme is. But, you know, you can also be a bit more subtle if it's like really obvious from the way the story develops that, And
so in other words, you're very much using your structure to push the theme as much as possible.
I tend to see it as using the theme to drive the structure.
Yep. No, that's a good point. Yeah. But they're working together and making the strongest possible story that you can get.
Yeah, and so the final, I always want so many movies disappoint me because the final climax is just who hits harder.
Yes, that's why I was so annoyed with Free Guy.
Yeah.
I loved that movie right up until that point.
But if you make it a moral choice that really
then that's what
difficult,
makes a difference.
Then that makes it much more meaningful.
Yep.
And
I'm very action oriented, so quite a lot of the time I have to sit back and remember to do that to make the actual thematic. Oh, that's like we were talking about Winslow Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Watching the Winslow Boy and the big moment, the huge impactful moment is not the finishing of the trial and the court verdict erupting and the verdict. It's in the quietness and the lull of the father just waking up after his nap and the housekeeper coming home and announcing the verdict, and it's done in silence and quietness. And the main person involved in that verdict, who is the young boy, he just comes to the door and he says, "I heard that we won. Isn't that something?" And then he goes off to play cricket. Because the big emotional impact is not in the huge fuss, it's in that quiet moment. Mm-hmm. So it's not all about the fight and in its quietness, it's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, and for all that I said, you can make things more memorable by wrapping them up in some big confrontation. You can also
make it memorable that way.
You can also make it memorable by making it a quieter and more intimate thing.
Yes.
One of the things that I wish more writers would really take to heart is that higher stakes is not about how much of the world is at peril.
Yes. It's about Supernatural. Are you listening?
No,
I don't think so.
How personal the stakes are. Like the stakes in The Empire Strikes Back are much higher than the stakes in A New Hope, even though A New Hope was about our planet's going to get blown up, and Empire Strikes Back was about, is Luke going to be turned to the dark side?
Some things are too big to be able to comprehend and to be able to package into your theme in a way that actually resonates with people.
Yeah, but you know, somebody's moral stance is you know, whether Luke is going to turn to the dark side or do the right thing, that's a much more personal stake. And so that's why the stakes feel more
higher,
dramatic.
Stronger. Yep.
And so the moral choice that Luke makes at the end of that movie is that he throws himself into the void rather than join his father in the dark side.
Yep.
Right? He's been completely beaten. He hasn't hit harder.
No spoilers here. If you haven't seen it, you should have.
And oh yeah. Whoops.
It's too late. We spoil you for everything.
Anyway, but he makes the moral choice not to join the dark side, and that is what gives the ending of that movie so much amazing emotional power.
Yeah, I actually have to go back and watch all those again because I watched them when I was in a very dark place and I still enjoyed part of them, but I would like to see that again. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start winding up now because Suzannah's going to run away at some stage. I don't think we've got too many more questions. I'm going to go into the miscellaneous and ones that we've picked up off people who couldn't be here today and we'll watch later. So if you have miscellaneous questions, pop them up there. We're only going to be talking for the next 10 minutes and then we're going to run away. So just as a final thing regarding everything that we've just talked about, what books do you recommend for people getting into plotting, structure, theme? Do you have one each for what you consider each topic? Feel free to combine structure and plotting because I know that's, more your thing. So if you've got those, let us know. Tell the people.
Yeah. I think in terms of plotting, I would really recommend doing whatever feels naturally to you.
Yep.
In terms of, whatever works best for generating ideas, whatever works best for getting those ideas into a memorable place so that you can actually transfer them from your head to the draft. Whatever works for you, figure it out and just do your own thing, because it's so different for everybody.
Yes.
I would say.
But do you have any, like, for your particular kind of plotting or something that you consider is a really useful thing for somebody who wants to try plotting? Do you have any book recommendations for something you've read?
Well, for somebody who wants to learn about structure, I think there are a few different versions. Like there's Save the Cat. I wasn't tremendously impressed by that one. I thought it was a bit too prescriptive and granular. I do something much looser.
Yep.
So I read it. I wasn't tremendously impressed. K.M. Weiland has a blog helping writers become authors. She's got a lot of free stuff on that. She's also packaged some of it into books.
Patricia Reedy also does. I found a lot of really useful stuff for me as somebody who's more of a pantser but does occasionally plot. She has stuff on there as well. So those are also free, but she's got a book as well.
Yeah, actually, if you go to my website and go to frequently asked questions, I actually have a list of resources.
Oh, nice. Yeah, go there. Go to Suzannah's website.
Yeah, I've got a frequently asked questions thing in the menu, so check that out, and I have some resources.
And do you have anything that you can think of for theme?
Well, I was gonna say that K.M. Weiland has a book on how to structure your novel.
Oh,
and I also find her a little bit more prescriptive than I personally want to be.
But you can take and leave what works for you.
But I take what works for me, and it's, I think, the most helpful exercise I can recommend.
Rather than reading books in particular?
Once you have read the book.
Right, once you've read the book.
Read the book first. But then take your favourite books, the ones you know really well, Jane Austen, Shakespeare, Tolkien, or whatever. Like, it doesn't have to be somebody dead. I suppose.
And we don't recommend killing them if you do want to make a study of these books.
Take what you're reading about structure and then take some classic that you know works for you and see whether it follows what you're reading about in the how-to book. And if it doesn't, how it doesn't.
Right.
Like The Lord of the Rings, you know how it has, the Fellowship of the Ring is one narrative and then it splits in two, right? So the midpoint of The Lord of the Rings actually happens at the end of Fellowship.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I nearly sneezed.
How is that so ladylike? Guys, you don't want to be here for my sneezes. They are explosive.
Yeah. So yes.
Just find
read
out
the book,
what works
but
for you
then
there
also
and what people do well.
Compare with the classics and see whether that's actually what they're doing, and if they're varying it, how they're varying it, and why they're varying it,
and why it still works or doesn't work. Yeah.
Like,
usually it still does work.
The Lord of the Rings still works, even though the second half of the plot is twice as long as the first half, because it has because it's still paced well, things are still happening, and it's still interesting. Okay, for theme, I'm going to recommend two books. John Truby's book, The Anatomy of Story, is one of the best writing resources
I still have to read that.
I've ever come across. I don't use his plotting recommendations because, again, I find them a little granular.
Basically, do what works for you. Get the broad outlines and then find what works for you.
Pick and choose from all the options.
Don't let anyone tell you what to do, even me.
But Truby is fantastic on theme and what he calls character web and also revelation sequence. These are, Truby goes much deeper than most writing how-to guides.
Yep.
And he will really help you to think artistically, rather than formulaically,
which is always good.
Yeah. And so stuff on theme, symbol, revelations, information flow, all that sort of thing, he's fantastic for. I would also recommend K.M. Weiland's book, Creating Character Arcs. It's called something like that.
Yeah. But if you go to KM Wyland, it'll turn up.
Yeah, you can also get the blog posts, but she's really helpful in terms of saying, here's how you can use your character arc to develop your theme. So
right. Yep.
So that'd
be very useful.
I would recommend both of those. And again, just I find her character arc stuff more helpful than her plot stuff in terms of there's more of it that I use on a regular basis. But that's just because I'm much more like naturally plot oriented than I am character oriented.
And you've already worked out a lot of what works for you.
Yeah. Like I can plot very intuitively.
Yep.
But I don't quite do that the same way with like character arcs.
With character arcs. Yep.
Take a bit more work for me. And so I find her very helpful. And that will also help you to create believable character change, which is not something that comes naturally. Yes.
You have to work at that too.
And don't just focus on your protagonist for character arc. Any character in your story that's going to go through significant change
they need to have a proper arc. Don't just leave them
as a logical step-by-step progression through,
instead of just suddenly here and then suddenly there.
They don't have your characters teleport from one perspective to another perspective, because it's not going to feel convincing.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions that we'll address very, very quickly. Courtney wants to know what's one major thing you wished you would have understood before going into writing and self-publishing, and then we'll get to the last two questions that are here, and then we're going to sign off.
I think the main thing that I wish I had done more of was I wish I had a better idea of how the market works.
Yeah.
And how to find the intersection of things that I want to write
and what people want to read.
Things that people want to read.
Yeah. That is an important thing.
Yes, it's important to have an artistic integrity, and I believe I have found a way to have that while writing things that people want to read. There's a lot of stuff on how to write to market. There's literally a book called Write to Market, and I do highly recommend reading that, even if you plan not to write to market, because then at least you'll know what rules you're breaking and why, and you can actually...
And you can probably still make it work for you in the way that you do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And with me, I'm very good at just picking and choosing what's going to be helpful to me personally, and so it was helpful.
So Zywin Moon says, do you have a character in mind before you plot, and plot before character, or character before plot, which I guess is both? Much the same question.
Well, most of the time it's theme before either of those. And with Miss Sharp, the realization that I needed to have specifically Liz Sharp as the protagonist was a very late development. That was
instead of the one that you would have had, the princess, right?
I originally, the protagonist of the series was going to be Princess May, and
it's so much punchier having it this way, because you also get the juxtaposition of May and Liz, and it's delightful.
I stalled out on that project for months
because of that issue,
because I couldn't figure out how to make the story work with May as the protagonist.
Yeah.
And then
I can see why.
And then I binge read the City Between series, and I realized, I need a vulnerable protagonist.
Yeah.
And so I created Liz Sharp, and from then on, I had the first two books outlined in like 4 weeks. So
theme first.
Theme first, then for me often plot, and then character.
Yeah.
But then I'm just not super intuitive with writing my characters at all anyway. So
I quite often start with a relationship.
Relationships are so much easier than character.
I start with a dynamic usually, and the characters are inherent in that as well. So, and then from there, the story starts to just sort of build itself up. So that's for me. But again, I'm not a plotter, so that's probably not going to be as useful to people who are trying to learn how to plot.
No, because if you're a plotter, then you're probably going to be more intuitive of plot than you are going to be a characterization.
Yeah, I have to work very hard at getting plot.
I've noticed this. Either you're a plot foremost writer or you're a character foremost writer. I'm much more a plot foremost writer.
And I'm definitely character.
Yeah. So one of the big realizations for me was, if you want to come up with compelling characters, it's less about who the character is alone themselves. It's
And who
much
they
more
are in
about who they're
relationship.
playing off.
Yep.
So yeah, come up with
That's the
relationships.
important thing. I think that's why the MCU does so well, even though they consistently turn out some subpar as well as some very good things, because no matter what you do, you're going in there getting some really fun character interactions and people bouncing off other people in the most delightful ways. Right, so we're about to 1/4 past, which is sort of 15 minutes after I was planning on finishing, but I think we actually got to talk about some really fun stuff, so I'm not mad at that. Susanna has to run away soon, so we're going to have lunch, which I believe involves pumpernickel and sourdough.
Either or.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I've never tried pumpernickel bread before, so here we go. Thank you so much for coming, guys. Check out Susanna's books. I really love the Sharp trilogy, Miss Sharp's Monsters, but I'm extremely fond of Miss Dark also. I delighted in it. It's a con story. I love the con. Some of my favorite stuff on whether it's movies or books is it involves con artists. So thank you guys all for coming out. Enjoy Susanna's books, read Susanna's books. And if you have any questions, she does have an author group. And she also has an author page. You can go follow her there and get more ideas. She's also on Twitter and she puts out some really fun stuff there as well. So thank you
for having me, and thank you for listening to me.
giving up your time.
Yeah. I hope that's been helpful.
All right, guys, we are gonna go. Have a lovely rest of your day or night or whatever the heck it is there. And bye.